They say your life flashes before your eyes right before you die. Mine didn't flash. It burned. I choked on the thick black smoke of the Oak Ridge Psychiatric Center, a place my darling stepsister, Harper Linwood, had locked me in after stealing my fiancé, my inheritance, and my sanity. As the ceiling beams collapsed, my last thought wasn't a plea for salvation. It was a vow for vengeance. When I opened my eyes next, I wasn't in hell. I was staring at the crystal chandelier of my family's Newport estate, 5 years in the past. Harper was about to steal my life again. But this time, I'm going to hand it to her on a silver platter and watch her choke on it. The smell of smoke was still in my hair. Or at least, my phantom senses believed it was. I sat up violently, gasping for air, clutching at the silk sheets of my canopy bed. My chest heaved, my lungs desperately searching for oxygen that wasn't tainted with the acrid stench of burning drywall and melting plastic. I looked down at my hands. They were unscarred. The IV bruises on my forearms from Dr. Alistair Webb's daily calming injections were gone. My skin was smooth, young, and entirely unblemished. I stumbled out of bed and practically fell into the adjoining master bathroom, gripping the edges of the marble vanity. Staring back at me in the mirror was a 22-year-old Genevieve Collins. My eyes were bright, my cheeks flushed with youth, and the haunting, hollowed-out stare of a woman broken by 3 years in a high-security ward was completely absent. I looked at the digital clock on the wall. September 14th, 2021. I dropped to the cold tile floor, a hysterical, breathless laugh escaping my lips. September 14th, the night of the Vanguard Shipping and Logistics annual charity gala. The night everything began to unravel in my previous life. In the life that had just burned to ash, tonight was the night Harper Linwood, the quiet, mousy daughter of my father's new wife, made her first real move. She had worn a dress in the exact shade of emerald green as mine, a total accident that made us look like twins. She had cornered my fiancé, Tristan Cole, by the ice sculpture, weeping about how out of place she felt in our high society world, sparking his protective instincts. And later, she had confidently pitched my proprietary logistics algorithm, Project Apex, to Theodore Kensington of Oakmont Capital, claiming it as her own late-night brainstorm. When I had confronted her in my past life, I looked unhinged. I screamed. I cried. I demanded Tristan back me up, but he just looked at me with pity. "Jen, stop being so paranoid," he had said. "Harper is just trying to find her footing." That paranoia label was the first brick in the asylum they eventually built around me. "Genevieve?" A soft knock on the door pulled me from the memory. "Are you almost ready? The caterers are downstairs." It was her, Harper. I stood up, smoothing down my silk robe. The urge to rip the door open and wrap my hands around her throat was a living, breathing monster in my chest. But a dead Harper wouldn't suffer. A dead Harper wouldn't know the humiliation of a total, catastrophic collapse. If I fought her now, I'd just be the jealous, territorial heiress again? No. If she wanted my life so badly, she could have it. Every single toxic, heavy, crumbling piece of it. I would let her steal the crown, but this time, I'd make sure it was forged from uranium. I opened the door. Harper stood there, practically vibrating with nervous energy. She was wearing the emerald green dress, the exact replica of the one hanging in my closet. Her eyes darted to my closet door, waiting for my reaction. She wanted the fight. She wanted my father, Richard Collins, to to hear me scream at her over a piece of silk. I smiled, a warm, terrifyingly genuine smile. "Harper," I breathed, stepping back to admire her. "You look absolutely stunning. That color on you? It's breathtaking." Her face fell, just a fraction. Confusion clouded her eyes. I hope you don't mind. The boutique sent it, and I thought—" "I don't mind at all," I interrupted, reaching out to gently squeeze her arm. The physical contact made my stomach churn, but I held my smile. "Actually, I was just thinking my green dress doesn't quite fit the mood I'm in tonight. You wear it. It belongs on you." "Are you sure?" she asked, her voice dipping into that saccharine, falsely innocent tone she used to manipulate my father. "I've never been more sure of anything," I said. "Now go downstairs. Tristan should be arriving soon. Keep him entertained for me, will you?" As she turned and walked down the sweeping mahogany staircase, I closed my door and leaned against it. I didn't reach for the green dress. Instead, I pulled out a simple, understated black velvet gown. If I was going to attend a funeral for my past life tonight, I might as well dress the part. The Vanguard Gala was a sea of old money, cutthroat venture capitalists, and glittering jewels. Waiters weaved through the crowd balancing trays of champagne, while the string quartet played a lively Vivaldi piece in the corner. I stood on the mezzanine, sipping sparkling water, watching the board being set. Down below, Harper was doing exactly what I knew she would. She was standing by the towering swan ice sculpture, her shoulders hunched just enough to look vulnerable, gazing up at Tristan. Tristan Cole. He was handsome in that sharp, aggressive Wall Street way, vice president of acquisitions at his father's firm, Cole and Sons. I used to think the sun rose and set in his eyes. Now, looking at him, all I saw was a weak, easily manipulated pawn who had signed my commitment papers without a second thought. I slowly descended the stairs, timing my approach perfectly. As I neared them, I heard the precise inflection of Harper's whine. "It's just so overwhelming, Tristan. Genevieve makes it look so effortless, but I feel like an imposter. I don't belong in this family." Tristan placed a comforting hand on her waist. "Don't say that, Harper. You're brilliant. Jen is just... well, she's used to being the center of attention. But you have real substance." I swallowed the bile rising in my throat and stepped into their line of sight. "There you two are," I chimed, my voice light and airy. Tristan dropped his hand from her waist as if he'd been burned, his face flushing guilty red. "Jen, you look different." He took in my black dress, clearly expecting the emerald gown he knew I had bought. "I decided to let Harper have the spotlight tonight," I said, slipping my arm through Tristan's and giving him a kiss on the cheek. I made sure to leave a smudge of deep red lipstick on his jaw. "She looks beautiful, doesn't she?" Harper offered a tight, forced smile. Genevieve was so generous. "Speaking of generous," I pivoted smoothly, looking directly at Harper. "I saw Theodore Kensington arrive. Have you spoken to him yet about your ideas?" Harper froze. Tristan looked confused. "Ideas?" Tristan asked. In the previous timeline, Harper had waited until I was distracted by a socialite to pitch my Project Apex algorithm to Theodore. She claimed it was a theoretical framework she'd been developing to cut Vanguard's shipping redundancies by 40%. It was brilliant because it was mine. I had spent 2 years coding it. "Oh, Harper is too modest," I told Tristan, patting his arm. "She's been working on this incredible logistics framework. I've looked over her notes, and honestly, Tristan, It's revolutionary. I turned back to Harper, my eyes wide and encouraging. You have to pitch it to Theodore tonight, Harper. Vanguard needs fresh blood, and Dad would be so proud. Harper was staring at me like I had grown a second head. She had hacked my laptop 3 days ago. I knew that for a fact. She had stolen the files, planning to present them as her own to blindside me. My open endorsement completely short-circuited her narrative. She had prepared for me to call her a thief in front of everyone, which would make me look hysterical and paranoid while she played the crying victim. By handing her the credit publicly, I was removing her weapon, while simultaneously pushing her onto a stage she didn't know how to navigate alone. I don't know if it's ready, she stammered. Nonsense, I insisted, grabbing her hand and pulling her toward the VIP section, where Theodore Kensington, a ruthless titan of industry with a notorious lack of patience, was holding court. Mr. Kensington, I announced as we approached. The older man turned, his sharp gray eyes assessing us. Genevieve Collins. A pleasure as always. And who is this? This is my sister Harper, I said, beaming. She's practically a prodigy. She was just telling me about a new algorithm she's designed that could restructure your entire Pacific Fleet's routing efficiency. I insisted she tell you. Theodore raised an eyebrow, looking intrigued. Is that so? Well, Miss Linwood, I have 3 minutes before I need another scotch. Dazzle me. I stepped back, melting into the crowd, and watched. Harper was intelligent, but she wasn't a coder. She had memorized my executive summary, but she didn't understand the underlying mathematics. I watched from afar as she began to speak. At first, Theodore nodded. The core concept of Project Apex was flawless, after all. But then, he started asking questions. I could see the exact moment Harper began to drown. Her hands fluttered. Her smile turned brittle. She looked around the room, panicking, searching for me to jump in and save her. Or better yet, to jump in and claim it was mine so she could cry bullying. But I was leaning against a pillar 50 feet away, raising my glass of sparkling water in a silent cheer. When she finally finished her disastrous, stumbling explanation, Theodore gave her a patronizing pat on the shoulder. An interesting dream, my dear. But I suggest you leave the heavy lifting to the engineers. He walked away, leaving Harper humiliated in the center of the room. Tristan rushed to her side, consoling her. The hook was set. She would be desperate now. She would need a win to prove she wasn't an idiot, and she would rely on the stolen files even more to build her reputation. What she didn't know, what no one knew, was that the night before, I had gone into my own laptop and intentionally corrupted the core predictive modeling equations of Project Apex. If Harper built Vanguard's future on that stolen code, it would work flawlessly for about a year, and then, at peak operational capacity, it would trigger a cascading failure that would bankrupt the company. I walked out to the terrace, letting the cold ocean breeze hit my face. My phone buzzed in my clutch. It was a text from a contact I had reached out to earlier that day, a man who would never betray me because I knew exactly what skeletons were in his closet from my past life. Declan Reed. I'm in. The Shell Corporation is registered. We're ready when you are. I typed back. Good. The bait has been taken. Let her eat. 6 months passed. 6 agonizing, meticulously calculated months. To the outside world, the Collins family was undergoing a fascinating transition. Genevieve, the former golden child, had suddenly lost her ambition. I stopped going to board meetings. I started spending my days at country clubs and art galleries, playing the role of the vacuous, burnt-out heiress perfectly. Nature abhors a vacuum, and Harper rushed to fill it, bolstered by her stolen copy of my work, which she had handed over to a team of outsourced developers to fix after her humiliation with Kensington. Harper became the rising star of Vanguard shipping. My father, thrilled to have a daughter showing interest in the legacy, promoted her to vice president of innovation. And then there was Tristan. Breaking off the engagement was the easiest and most fun I'd had since I woke up in this timeline. I didn't scream. I didn't accuse them of the affair I knew they were having in cheap hotels downtown. Instead, I invited Tristan to dinner at a Michelin star restaurant and put on an Oscar-worthy performance of tragic self-reflection. "I'm broken, Tristan," I had whispered across the candle-lit table, letting a single tear slip down my cheek. "I don't know who I am anymore. The pressure of Vanguard, the wedding, it's suffocating me. I can't give you the partnership you deserve." Tristan, the eternal narcissist, ate it up. He loved playing the noble gentleman. "Jen, if you need time—" "I need to let you go," I interrupted, sliding the 3-carat diamond ring across the table. "You need someone driven, someone who understands the corporate world, someone like Harper." I watched the micro-expression on his face. The flash of guilt followed immediately by relief. He thought it was his idea. He thought they had kept their dirty little secret perfectly hidden. Within 2 weeks, they were publicly dating. Within 2 months, they were engaged. Harper made sure to flaunt the new ring, a gaudy, square-cut sapphire, in my face at Sunday family dinners. I would just smile, sip my wine, and offer my congratulations. But while Harper was picking out floral arrangements and taking credit for the launch of the Apex Logistics Suite, I was busy. I had rented a small, unmarked office in downtown Boston under the name Aegis Dynamics. Sitting across from me was Declan Reed. Declan was a forensic accountant with a razor-sharp mind and a slight gambling problem that I had bailed him out of. He was entirely mine. "She's moving fast, Jen," Declan said, sliding a thick file across the desk. The room was dark, illuminated only by the glow of his multiple monitors. "Harper just secured a $50 million line of credit from Oakmont Capital to implement the Apex software across Vanguard's entire European fleet. Theodore Kensington signed off on it himself. I guess she managed to convince him her engineers fixed the glitches." I flipped open the file, scanning the financial projections. "They didn't fix the glitches, Declan. They just slapped a Band-Aid on a gaping wound. The machine learning model she stole from me relies on a recursive loop. The more data you feed it, the more unstable it becomes. At Vanguard's current shipping volume, when does the algorithm hit critical mass?" Declan tapped his keyboard, bringing up a complex graph. "Based on the corrupted equations you showed me, if she implements it fleet-wide by next month, the system will suffer a complete predictive collapse in exactly 8 months. Ships will be routed to the wrong ports. Supply chains will completely freeze. Vanguard will bleed millions a day in penalties." "And the shell company?" I asked. Declan grinned. "Ready and waiting. We've secured the patents for the actual algorithm, the uncorrupted one you finished from memory. It's registered under Aegis Dynamics. We also quietly bought up the debt of 3 major shipping competitors that will instantly benefit when Vanguard's system crashes." I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. In my past life, Harper had driven me insane by gaslighting me. She convinced my father I was stealing from the company to fuel a non-existent drug habit. She convinced Tristan I was physically abusive. They locked me in Oak Ridge to save me. "She's also quietly embezzling," Declan noted, breaking my train of thought. He pointed to a highlighted column on the spreadsheet. "Small amounts. Phony consulting fees funneled to an offshore account in the Caymans. She's building a nest egg. I laughed out loud. It was perfect. She was so greedy she couldn't just settle for stealing the company. She had to rob it blind while she was at it. Let her, I said smoothly. Document every single transfer. Trace the IPs. Get video surveillance of her entering the bank if you have to. But don't touch it. Let her think she's a criminal mastermind. You're terrifying, you know that? Declan said, though there was deep respect in his eyes. When she goes down, she's going to take your father's company with her. Vanguard might not survive the crash. Vanguard is a dinosaur, I replied coldly. My father handed the keys to a thief because she smiled sweetly and played the victim. He deserves what's coming. Aegis Dynamics will sweep in and buy Vanguard's assets for pennies on the dollar when the dust settles. My phone buzzed. It was a calendar alert. Harper and Tristan's engagement party, the Collins estate. I stood up, smoothing my coat. Keep tracking the Cayman accounts, Declan. I have a party to attend. When I arrived at the estate, the gardens were strung with fairy lights. Laughter echoed across the manicured lawns. I walked through the crowd, practically invisible now that I was no longer the heir apparent. I found Harper near the champagne fountain. She was surrounded by my old friends, regaling them with the stress of being the VP of Vanguard. When she saw me, her eyes lit up with that familiar predatory gleam. She broke away from the group and approached me. "Genevieve, you made it," she said, her voice dripping with fake pity. "I was worried you'd be too, overwhelmed to come. It must be hard seeing Tristan and me so happy." I looked at her, really looked at her. I saw the arrogance, the smug satisfaction of a parasite that had successfully drained its host. "Harper?" I said, my voice barely above a whisper, keeping a serene smile on my face. "I've never been happier for you. Really. You've taken on so much responsibility. You are the face of Vanguard now. Everything the company does. It all rests on your shoulders." She puffed her chest out slightly. "I'm ready for it. I was born for this." "I know," I replied, taking a glass of champagne from a passing waiter and raising it to her. "To your future, Harper. May you get exactly what you deserve." We clinked glasses. She drank deep, victorious. I let the champagne touch my lips, but I didn't swallow. I didn't need to. I was already intoxicated by the ticking clock counting down to her absolute spectacular ruin. The problem with stealing a crown is that you eventually have to wear it, and heavy gold has a way of snapping a fragile neck. By the spring of 2022, Harper Linwood was the undisputed queen of Boston's corporate elite. Vanguard shipping stock had surged 30% on the back of the Apex Logistics suite. To the financial press, she was a visionary. Forbes even put her on a 30 under 30 shortlist. She was practically levitating with self-importance. I, on the other hand, was currently sitting on a plush velvet sofa in LeBlanc, the most exclusive bridal boutique in the city, sipping complimentary champagne while Harper paraded around in a $40,000 Vera Wang gown. "What do you think, Jen?" Harper asked, twirling in front of the floor-to-ceiling mirrors. The dress was an explosion of tulle and hand-stitched lace. It was loud, expensive, and completely devoid of taste, much like the bride herself. "It's a statement piece, Harper," I said, offering a serene, perfectly calibrated smile. "It commands the room. Tristan won't be able to look at anyone else." Her mother, Beatrice, a woman whose face was pulled so tight by Botox she permanently looked surprised, clapped her hands. "Oh, it's magnificent! Richard is going to weep when he walks you down the aisle." The mention of my father walking his stepdaughter down the aisle, a privilege that should have been mine, would have broken me in my past life. I would have stormed out, tears streaming down my face, giving Beatrice exactly what she wanted, proof of my instability. Today, I just took another sip of my mimosa. He certainly will, I agreed smoothly. Harper's phone buzzed sharply from the pedestal where she had left her designer clutch. She sighed dramatically, the picture of a burdened executive. Duty calls. Honestly, the European fleet managers are helpless without me. She picked up the phone, tapping the screen to answer. Harper speaking. What is it, Davis? I watched her reflection in the mirror. I knew exactly who Davis was. He was the lead systems engineer she had hired to oversee the Apex implementation. A routing anomaly? Harper scoffed, waving a manicured hand dismissively. Davis, it's a machine learning algorithm. It's optimizing. If a shipment of pharmaceuticals was rerouted from Antwerp to, where? Lisbon? Then it means Lisbon is the faster route. That's what the system does. There was a pause as Davis frantically spoke on the other end. Harper rolled her eyes at me. I am not authorizing a manual override, Davis. The board is reviewing the Q2 metrics tomorrow, and I won't have you muddying the data with human error. Trust the math. That's an order. She hung up, tossing the phone back into her bag. Engineers, they panic the second a computer does something they don't understand. My phone buzzed silently in my pocket. I pulled it out, shielding the screen. It was a text from Declan. Declan read. First domino just fell. Port of Antwerp. The predictive loops are starting to cannibalize their own data. System degradation is at 12% and climbing. I typed back a single word. Beautiful. Harper was ignoring the smoke alarms because she didn't know how to read the panel. She didn't understand that the algorithm wasn't optimizing. It was hallucinating. The corrupted equations I had planted were beginning to misinterpret supply chain bottlenecks, creating phantom traffic and routing ships into dead zones. Everything all right at the office? I asked, putting my phone away. Perfectly fine, Harper lied, admiring her profile in the mirror. Just growing pains. Vanguard is evolving, and some of the old guard just can't keep up. By the way, Genevieve, Tristan and I were hoping you'd do a reading at the ceremony. A poem about forgiveness and moving forward. We think it would show everyone how healed you are. It was a power play, plain and simple. She wanted me standing at the altar, publicly validating her theft of my fiancé. I would be absolutely honored, I said, my voice thick with faux emotion. I'll start looking for the perfect words tonight. I didn't need to look for words. I already knew exactly what I would be reading on her wedding day. The bankruptcy filings. The Vanguard Q2 Shareholder Summit was held in the glass-domed atrium of the Four Seasons. It was a victory lap for my father, and a coronation for Harper. I sat in the third row, dressed in a muted charcoal suit, blending into the sea of analysts and investors. Tristan sat beside me, occasionally checking his Rolex. His firm, Cole & Sons, had heavily leveraged their own assets to back Vanguard's aggressive expansion under Harper's leadership. He had bet his entire career trajectory on her genius. On stage, my father, Richard Collins, tapped the microphone. He looked older than I remembered, the stress of the past few years etching deep lines into his face. But today, he was beaming. Ladies and gentlemen, my father boomed, his voice echoing through the atrium. When I took over Vanguard 20 years ago, we navigated by the stars and paper charts. Today, we navigate by the future, and that future was built by our Vice President of Innovation. Please welcome my daughter, Harper Linwood. The applause was thunderous. Harper walked out to the podium wearing a sharp white power suit, her sapphire engagement ring catching the stage lights. She looked invincible. "Thank you, Richard," she began, projecting confidence. "When I designed Project Apex, my vision was simple: eliminate the friction of global trade. I am proud to announce that as of this morning, the Apex system has been fully integrated into 100% of our global fleet. We are operating at maximum efficiency." She clicked a remote, and a massive LED screen behind her lit up with a digital map of the world. Thousands of green dots, Vanguard cargo ships, were moving smoothly across the oceans. "This quarter alone," Harper continued, "we have reduced transit times by 18% and slashed fuel costs by—" A sharp, grating alarm suddenly echoed through the sound system. It wasn't an ambient noise. It was the emergency override from the Vanguard control room, patched directly into the executive communications channel. The green dots on the massive LED screen flickered. One by one, they started turning red. First in the Pacific, then across the Atlantic, then the Mediterranean. "Apologies," Harper stammered, her confident smile faltering. "A minor UI glitch with the presentation software. As I was saying—" Her phone rang, not a discreet buzz, but a blaring ringtone right into the podium microphone. She silenced it frantically, but then my father's phone rang. Then the CFO's. Within seconds, the phones of every major Vanguard executive in the front row were ringing simultaneously. My father answered his face draining of color within 3 seconds. "What do you mean, all of them?" he barked, abandoning all corporate decorum. I leaned forward, my heart beating a slow, steady rhythm of pure euphoria. "Dad, what's going on?" Harper asked, covering the microphone. "The Port of Los Angeles just denied entry to 3 of our freighters," my father said loudly, panic bleeding into his voice. "The manifests don't match the cargo. The system is telling the Port Authority we're carrying hazardous materials when we're supposed to be carrying grain." Harper swallowed hard. That's impossible. Davis must have misconfigured the API. I'll have him reset the—" "It's not just LA," the chief operating officer yelled, standing up. "I've got the Suez Canal Authority on the line. 4 of our ultra-large crude carriers just dropped anchor in the middle of the shipping lane. The system issued an emergency halt order. They're blocking the entire canal!" The room erupted. Journalists began frantically typing. Investors were standing up, shouting questions. On the screen behind Harper, the map was now a sea of crimson. The algorithm had hit critical mass. The recursive loops were generating millions of conflicting commands per second. It wasn't just rerouting ships. It was shutting down refrigerated containers, carrying millions of dollars in perishable goods. It was ordering ships to sail at maximum speed toward unnavigable shoals. It was a digital apocalypse. "Harper, turn it off!" my father screamed over the din. "Revert to the manual backup." Harper gripped the edges of the podium, her knuckles white. The illusion of the tech genius was evaporating in real time, leaving behind a terrified 20-something who didn't know the difference between a Python script and a spreadsheet. I can't," she whispered, her voice caught by the microphone and broadcast to the entire room. "There is no manual backup. We overwrote the legacy systems to save server space. Like I recommended." Next to me, Tristan stood up, his face a mask of absolute horror. "She overwrote the backups?" he muttered, sounding like a man who had just watched his house burn down. "Cole and Sons just underwrote $500 million in cargo insurance for this fleet." "Tristan," I said softly, looking up at him with wide, innocent eyes. "Is something wrong?" He didn't even look at me. He just bolted for the exit, dialing his father frantically. Theodore Kensington, the titan of Oakmont Capital who had loaned Harper $50 million, stood up from the front row. He didn't shout. He didn't panic. He just looked at Harper with cold, predatory eyes. "Miss Linwood," Kensington said, his voice cutting through the chaos like a scythe. "You have exactly 1 hour to get your phantom algorithm under control, or Oakmont Capital will call in our debt. In full." He walked out. The room descended into sheer pandemonium. I remained in my seat, crossing my legs, watching Harper hyperventilate on stage as my father screamed at his phone. It was beautiful, a masterpiece of destruction. But the main act was still yet to come. The fallout was catastrophic. Within 48 hours, Vanguard Shipping was bleeding $30 million a day in penalties, ruined cargo, and port fines. The stock price didn't just drop. It plummeted into the abyss, halted by the SEC 3 times in a single day to prevent a total market panic. The Vanguard executive boardroom was thick with the stench of stale coffee and desperation. It was 2 a.m. on a Friday. I was there, invited by my father in a moment of desperate nostalgia, hoping I could offer some sort of clarity since I had originally outlined the concept of Project Apex before Harper perfected it. Harper was pacing like a caged animal. Her hair was greasy, her designer clothes wrinkled. Tristan was sitting at the far end of the table, arms crossed, refusing to look at her. His father's firm had suspended him pending an internal review. "We need cash," my father said, his voice hoarse, rubbing his temples. "We need liquidity to pay the Suez fines before they seize the vessels. Kensington won't answer my calls. The banks have frozen our credit lines." "I can fix the code," Harper shrieked, slamming her hands on the table. "I just need more time. The developers are working around the clock." "You don't even know what the code is," Tristan snapped, his voice venomous. "I spoke to your lead engineer, Harper. He said you couldn't even explain the basic routing logic to him. You're a fraud." "Tristan, how can you say that?" Harper cried, tears welling in her eyes. "The victim card." She was reaching for it, right on schedule. "I did this for us, for our future." "Our future is bankrupt," Tristan spat. My father held up a hand. "Enough, both of you. The fact remains, we are insolvent. We are missing $4 million in operational funds that were supposed to cover emergency port fees. I've had accounting searching for it for 2 days." I checked my watch. 2:15 a.m. Right on cue, the heavy oak doors of the boardroom swung open. It wasn't an executive. It was 2 men in dark suits, accompanied by the Vanguard chief of security. "Richard Collins?" the taller man asked, flashing a silver badge. "Agent Miller, FBI, White Collar Crimes Division. We're executing a search warrant." My father stood up, stunned. A search warrant? On what grounds?" "Wire fraud, corporate embezzlement, and violation of the Sarbanes-Oxley Act," Agent Miller recited, his eyes scanning the room until they landed on Harper. "We received an anonymous data dump 48 hours ago outlining a sophisticated embezzlement scheme funneled through Vanguard's R&D department." Harper froze. The blood drained from her face so fast I thought she might faint. "Embezzlement?" my father repeated, bewildered. "That's impossible. We're bleeding money due to a software failure, not theft." Agent Miller pulled a thick manila envelope from his briefcase and tossed it onto the mahogany table. It slid right in front of my father. "Someone has been authorizing fake consulting invoices under the Apex project for the last 8 months. Exactly $4.2 million. Routed through shell companies in Delaware and deposited into an offshore account in the Cayman Islands." I kept my face perfectly neutral, but internally, I was grinning. Declan Reed's paper trail was a work of art. That's a lie, Harper whispered, stepping back. I wouldn't. The IP addresses that authorized the transfers match the terminal in the Vice President of Innovation's office, Miller stated flatly. And the Cayman account? It's registered under a holding company called Linwood Holdings, LLC. Tristan let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. You stole from the company? While you were bankrupting it, you were siphoning cash? No! Harper screamed, the mask totally slipping. The sweet, innocent stepsister was gone, replaced by a cornered rat. She pointed a trembling finger directly at me. It was her! Genevieve did this! She set me up! She's jealous of me! She always has been! My father looked at me, a flicker of doubt in his eyes. He remembered my paranoia from the past life. He remembered the screaming matches. I didn't scream. I didn't defend myself. I just looked at her with profound, devastating pity. Harper, I said softly, my voice echoing in the dead silence of the room. I haven't had executive access to the Vanguard servers in over a year. Dad revoked my security clearance when you were promoted. How could I possibly authorize invoices? My father's eyes widened. He remembered. He was the one who signed the revocation order at Harper's urging to ensure there were no competing visions for the company. She hacked it! Harper shrieked, hysterical now. She's trying to ruin me! Miss Linwood, Agent Miller interrupted coldly. We also have ATM surveillance footage of you physically depositing the initial setup funds for the shell company in a Boston branch 6 months ago. Please place your hands behind your back. The silence that followed was heavier than lead. My father sank back into his leather chair, a broken man. Beatrice's golden child was a thief. His legacy was in ruins. Tristan stared blankly at the wall, realizing his entire life was chained to a criminal. As the FBI agent clicked the cold steel handcuffs around Harper's wrists, her eyes met mine. For a split second, the hysteria vanished, replaced by a sudden, terrifying realization. She saw the absolute calm in my eyes. She saw the lack of surprise. She knew. You... she breathed, struggling against the agent's grip. You let me take it. The project. You wanted me to take it. I stood up slowly, smoothing the wrinkles from my charcoal suit. I walked around the table, stopping just inches from her. I told you, Harper, I whispered, so quietly that only she could hear. The green dress looked better on you. I just wanted to make sure you had the matching bracelets. I stepped back and watched as they marched her out of the boardroom. The crown I had handed her had finally broken her neck. And as I walked out of the Vanguard building into the cool Boston night, I pulled out my phone and dialed Declan. It's done, I said to the night air. Call Theodore Kensington. Tell him Aegis Dynamics is ready to buy Vanguard's debt for 20 cents on the dollar. The morning after Harper's arrest, Boston didn't just wake up to news, it woke up to an execution. The financial networks were having a field day. B-roll footage of Harper being escorted out of the Vanguard building in handcuffs looped on every major channel, juxtaposed against the plunging red line of Vanguard's stock ticker. The headline on the Wall Street Journal read, "The Prodigy's Plunge. Vanguard Vice President arrested in $4.2 million embezzlement scandal as supply chain collapses." I sat in my penthouse, sipping Earl Grey tea and watching the sun rise over the Charles River. For the first time since waking up in this timeline, the phantom smell of smoke was entirely gone. My phone buzzed. Declan. Kensington is ready for us, Declan said, his voice crackling with barely contained adrenaline. He called back 5 minutes after I made the pitch. He's furious about Vanguard, but he's a shark. He smells blood in the water, and he knows we're holding the only life raft. I'll meet you at Oakmont Capital in 30 minutes, I replied, setting my teacup down. Bring the patent filings for the real Apex algorithm. Let's go by my father's company. An hour later, Declan and I walked into the hushed, mahogany-paneled conference room of Oakmont Capital. Theodore Kensington was standing by the floor-to-ceiling window, looking down at the city like a king surveying a conquered province. He turned as we entered, his sharp gray eyes narrowing. "Miss Collins?" Kensington said, his voice dangerously soft. "When, mister? Reed here called representing Aegis Dynamics. I expected to meet a faceless tech founder, not the sister of the woman who just burned $50 million of my capital." "Stepsister," I corrected gently, taking a seat at the massive glass table without waiting for an invitation. "And she didn't burn it, Theodore. She just misplaced it. I know exactly where it is." Kensington raised an eyebrow, taking the seat across from me. "Enlighten me." "Harper stole a prototype of a logistics algorithm I was building," I explained, my voice steady, strictly business. "She didn't understand the math, so she forced its implementation before the fail-safes were coded. It was bound to cascade. I saw the writing on the wall, so I quietly stepped away, founded Aegis Dynamics, and perfected the actual system." Declan slid a thick, leather-bound portfolio across the table. "This is the patent for the true Apex sequence, Mr. Kensington. It is fully operational, stable, and entirely owned by Aegis." Kensington flipped through the first few pages, his eyes scanning the technical summaries. "You let her crash the company," he realized, looking up at me with a mixture of shock and profound respect. "You knew it was going to fail, and you let her take the wheel." "She insisted." I smiled coldly. "The point is, Theodore, Vanguard is currently trading at a historic low. The board is panicked, the fleet is paralyzed, and they owe you $50 million they cannot pay. If you force bankruptcy, you'll be tied up in litigation for a decade trying to recoup pennies." "And your proposal?" "Aegis Dynamics buys Oakmont's debt at a 20% premium payable over 5 years. I said, leaning forward. "You get your money back with interest. In exchange, you back Aegis in a hostile takeover of Vanguard. With your proxy votes and the debt we hold, the Vanguard board will have no choice but to accept our buyout. We implement the real algorithm, unfreeze the fleet by Monday, and absorb Vanguard's assets into Aegis." Kensington was silent for a long time. He tapped his gold pen against the glass. He was doing the math, calculating the risk. Finally, a slow, predatory smile spread across his face. "Your father thought he was handing the keys to a visionary." Kensington chuckled, shaking his head. He didn't realize the real killer was the one sitting quietly in the corner. "I accept your terms, Genevieve. Let's go butcher a dinosaur." The emergency Vanguard board meeting was called for 3 o'clock that afternoon. When I walked into the room, the atmosphere was funereal. The board members looked like they hadn't slept in days. My father, Richard, was sitting at the head of the table, his face ashen, looking 10 years older than he had the day before. Beside him sat Beatrice, weeping softly into a monogrammed handkerchief. She had insisted on being there, desperate to protect her family's remaining share of the pie. "Genevieve," my father rasped, looking confused as I walked in, followed by Declan and Theodore Kensington. "What are you doing here?" "This is a closed board meeting." "I know, Dad," I said, taking the seat directly opposite him at the far end of the table. "But as of an hour ago, Aegis Dynamics is Vanguard's largest creditor. I'm here to collect." My father blinked, his exhausted mind struggling to process the information. Aegis Dynamics? That's the firm Kensington said was buying our debt. What does that have to do with you? Declan stood up, handing out copies of our acquisition proposal to the board members. Genevieve Collins is the sole founder and CEO of Aegis Dynamics, Declan announced. A collective gasp rippled through the room. Beatrice stopped crying, her tear-streaked face twisting into an ugly mask of confusion and rage. You're Aegis? But you've been doing nothing for 2 years. You dropped out of the business. I didn't drop out, Beatrice, I said, my voice cutting through the room like ice. I relocated. While Harper was busy pretending to be a genius and siphoning the company's emergency funds to buy offshore real estate, I was building a functional alternative to her house of cards. You set her up! Beatrice screeched, standing up. You framed my daughter for the embezzlement. Beatrice, sit down, Kensington barked. The sheer authority in his voice made her flinch and drop back into her chair. The FBI traced the IP addresses and found the ATM footage. Your daughter is a common thief. Be grateful Miss Collins is offering a lifeline, or you'd all be facing personal liability lawsuits. My father stared at me, his eyes wide, reading the proposal in front of him. You're offering a complete buyout. $2 a share. Genevieve, that wipes out my equity entirely. I'll be left with nothing but my pension. In my past life, this was the man who had signed the papers committing me to Oak Ridge. He had stood by while Harper convinced him I was a drug-addicted lunatic. He chose the quiet, compliant stepdaughter over his own flesh and blood because it was easier than dealing with a woman who challenged him. It wipes out the board's equity, yes, I said, my tone completely devoid of sympathy. Because the board failed in its fiduciary duty. You allowed an unqualified 24-year-old with zero engineering background to overwrite the core operational software of a global logistics firm. You failed, Dad, and the market doesn't reward failure. Jen, please, my father whispered, his voice breaking. Vanguard is my life's work. It's our family legacy. It was our legacy, I corrected him. Until you handed it to a parasite. You can take the Aegis buyout, retire with your pension, and walk away clean. Or you can vote no, Theodore calls in the 50 million. The SEC freezes your remaining assets on Monday, and you spend the rest of your life buried in federal litigation. The choice is yours. The vote was unanimous. They took the buyout. As the board members filed out, defeated and silent, my father lingered. He looked at me, really looked at me, perhaps for the first time in years. You planned this? He said quietly. From the night of the gala. You gave her the project. I gave her a loaded gun, I replied, packing my briefcase. She's the one who decided to point it at the company and pull the trigger. I just made sure I was wearing Kevlar. 6 months later, the federal courthouse in downtown Boston was besieged by reporters. The trial of Harper Linwood was the media circus of the year. The defense had tried every trick in the book. They claimed Harper was overwhelmed, that the embezzlement was a misunderstanding of corporate bonuses, that she was suffering from extreme executive burnout. When that failed, they tried to pivot to a narrative that I had orchestrated a massive cyber frame-up. But Declan's paper trail was bulletproof. We had the Cayman Island bank records, the digital footprint from her personal laptop, the encrypted emails to the offshore shell company, and most damning of all, the CCTV footage. But the final nail in Harper's coffin didn't come from the FBI. It came from the man she had stolen from me. Tristan Cole took the stand on a rainy Tuesday morning. He looked terrible. His sharp, aggressive Wall Street aura had evaporated. After Vanguard's collapse, Cole and Sons had suffered a massive liquidity crisis due to their exposure. Tristan's father had forced him out of the firm to appease their own furious shareholders. Tristan was currently unemployed, blacklisted from every major financial institution on the East Coast. He had cut a deal with federal prosecutors for full immunity in exchange for testifying about his knowledge of Harper's offshore accounts. I sat in the gallery, wearing a perfectly tailored navy suit, watching the destruction of their little romance. "Mr. Cole?" the prosecuting attorney asked, pacing in front of the jury box. "When did you first become aware of the entity known as Linwood Holdings, LLC?" Tristan wouldn't look at Harper. He kept his eyes fixed firmly on the prosecutor. "About 4 months before the collapse. Harper and I were looking at real estate in the Hamptons. She showed me a bank statement to prove she could cover a down payment in cash. The account was in the name of the LLC. Did you ask her where the money came from?" "She told me it was an undisclosed retention bonus from her father," Tristan said, his voice monotone. "She said she wanted to keep it secret from the board so it wouldn't cause jealousy among the other executives." Harper gripped the defense table, her knuckles white, her face twisted in absolute betrayal. "You coward!" she hissed, loud enough for the microphone to pick it up. The judge slammed his gavel, threatening to hold her in contempt. "He's rolling over to save himself," Declan whispered to me, seated on my left. "Classic Tristan." "Rats always eat each other when the ship goes down," I whispered back. Tristan's testimony completely dismantled the defense's argument that Harper was unaware of the money. She had actively used the stolen funds to try and leverage a luxury lifestyle. The jury deliberated for less than 6 hours. Guilty on 2 counts of wire fraud. Guilty on 1 count of corporate embezzlement. Guilty on violation of the Sarbanes-Oxley Act. The judge, a no-nonsense woman with zero patience for white-collar crime, sentenced her to 8 years in federal prison, with a minimum of 5 to be served before the possibility of parole, plus full restitution. As the bailiff moved to escort Harper out of the courtroom, she suddenly spun around, her wild eyes scanning the gallery until they locked onto mine. The sophisticated, polished VP was gone. She looked ragged, cornered, and utterly broken. "This is your fault!" she screamed, fighting against the bailiff's grip. "You took everything from me! You ruined my life!" I stood up slowly. The courtroom was dead silent, save for the hum of the air conditioning. I walked down to the wooden railing separating the gallery from the well of the court. "I didn't take anything, Harper," I said, my voice calm, projecting perfectly in the quiet room. "I handed you the keys to the kingdom. I stepped aside. I gave you the project, the title, the fiancé, and the power. I gave you exactly what you wanted." She stared at me, hyperventilating, tears streaming down her face. "You knew the code was flawed. You set a trap." "You're right," I admitted, my voice dropping to a whisper so only she and the bailiff could hear. "I corrupted the algorithm, but I didn't make you steal the $4 million, Harper. I didn't force you to set up offshore accounts. I didn't make you betray the company's trust. I laid out a trap, yes, but you are the one who happily walked into it because your greed was greater than your intelligence." I leaned in just an inch closer. "In another life, you locked me in a cage and watched me burn so you could steal my crown. Enjoy your cage, Harper. I hear the jumpsuits are a lovely shade of green." I turned my back on her and walked out of the courtroom, the sound of her hysterical sobbing echoing off the marble walls, fading into nothingness as the heavy oak doors swung shut behind me. 2 years later. The building that used to house Vanguard shipping now bore a sleek, minimalist steel logo. Aegis Global Logistics. We didn't just survive the collapse, we thrived. By implementing the uncorrupted, fully functional Apex algorithm, Aegis untangled the massive supply chain nightmare Vanguard had created within a single month. Once the system was stable, our efficiency skyrocketed to unprecedented heights. We absorbed 3 failing competitors, expanding our fleet by 40%. I was sitting in the CEO's office, the exact office my father used to occupy, completely gutted and redesigned. Gone was the heavy, oppressive mahogany, the suffocating cigar smoke, and the stale leather. The room was now bright, encased in floor-to-ceiling glass, letting the Atlantic sunlight pour in. The air smelled of fresh espresso and sea salt. The phantom scent of the Oak Ridge Psychiatric Center fire had finally stopped haunting my waking hours. Declan walked in, carrying his tablet and 2 steaming cups of coffee. He had officially been named Chief Financial Officer 6 months ago, a title he wore with sharp, tailored precision. "Quarterly reports are in," Declan said, setting a coffee on my desk. "European routing efficiency is up another 4%, and Theodore Kensington just formally requested to extend our line of credit at a heavily discounted interest rate. He loves you." "Kensington loves money," I corrected, taking a sip of the dark roast. "But I'll take his capital. What else do you have for me?" Declan leaned against the glass frame of the door, swiping on his screen. "A bit of personal news, if you care. I still keep tabs on the stragglers. Old habits die hard." "Entertain me." "Tristan Cole filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy yesterday," Declan read, an amused smirk playing on his lips. "After his father blacklisted him from the firm, he tried to start a boutique hedge fund. It tanked. He's currently working as a mid-level risk assessor for a subprime auto lender in New Jersey. They garnish his wages every week to pay off the settlements from the Vanguard fallout. They foreclosed on his luxury condo last month." I felt nothing. No vindictive joy, no residual anger. Tristan was a ghost from a past life, a weak, easily swayed man who had finally been crushed by the weight of his own mediocrity. He wanted a woman who would make him look good. Instead, he got one who made him a cautionary tale. "Noted," I said smoothly. "And my father?" "Richard and Beatrice finalized their divorce," Declan continued, his tone dropping its humor. "It was a bloodbath. Beatrice tried to go after his pension, claiming emotional distress, but the prenuptial agreement held up in court. She lost the Newport estate and moved into a rented 2-bedroom apartment in Boca Raton. She spends her days arguing with the homeowners association. Richard is living quietly in a cabin in Maine. He hasn't spoken to the press in over a year. My father, the man who had let it all happen. In a way, his punishment was the most poetic and agonizing of all. He didn't go to prison, but he had to wake up every single day knowing his legacy was entirely gone. He had to live with the agonizing truth that he had thrown away his actual daughter for a mirage, and that I was the one who had conquered the empire he was too blind to protect. Irrelevance is a slow, quiet death for a man of ego. He left a voicemail on my birthday last week, I admitted softly, looking out at the water. He sounded incredibly old. He asked if we could get coffee, said he wanted to apologize for misjudging the situation. "Did you call him back?" Declan asked. "I deleted it halfway through," I replied, my voice devoid of emotion. "You don't get to apologize for holding the match after the house has already burned down." Declan nodded in understanding. "And then there's Harper. I received a notification from the Danbury Federal Correctional Institution this morning. I paused, setting my coffee down. Is she filing another useless appeal? No, Declan said, looking up from his tablet. She put you on her approved visitor list. She sent a formal request through her public defender. She wants to see you. I stared at the tablet in his hands. A part of me, the old Genevieve, the one who had screamed for justice in a padded cell, wanted to ignore it. But the woman I had become needed to close the circle. Clear my afternoon, I said, standing up. 3 hours later, I was walking down the sterile, fluorescent-lit corridors of Danbury Federal. The heavy metal doors clanged shut behind me, a sound that used to paralyze me in my past life. Today, it was just background noise. I sat down in the visitor's booth, picking up the heavy black telephone receiver. Through the thick, smudged plexiglass, a door opened. Harper walked in. If I hadn't known it was her, I might not have recognized the woman taking the seat across from me. The radiant, arrogant VP of innovation was completely gone. Her hair was dull and cropped short. Her skin was sallow, stripped of the expensive serums and spa treatments she used to steal from my bathroom. She wore a shapeless, faded khaki jumpsuit. She picked up the receiver with trembling hands. Her eyes were wide, desperate, and hollowed out. Genevieve, she breathed, her voice cracking. You came. I did, I replied evenly. You have 3 minutes, Harper. Make them count. She swallowed hard, tears instantly welling in her eyes. I'm so sorry. Jen, please. I'm sorry. I was stupid. My mother, Beatrice, she pushed me. She told me if I didn't take your place, I'd be nothing. The prison, it's a nightmare. The food, the noise. I can't sleep. I can't breathe in here. She pressed her hand against the glass. Please, you own Aegis. You have Kensington's ear. You can talk to the prosecutors. You can tell them I was manipulated. You can get my sentence reduced. I'll do anything. I'll scrub your floors. Just let me out. I looked at her hand pressed against the glass. I didn't raise mine to meet it. In my last life, I said, my voice barely a whisper, yet carrying the weight of 1,000 lifetimes. I was locked in a facility very much like this one. I told them I couldn't breathe. I told them I was trapped. And you stood on the other side of a door, Harper, and you smiled while the building burned around me. Harper froze, her brow furrowing in confusion. What? What are you talking about? What last life? It doesn't matter if you understand, I said, leaning closer to the glass, my eyes locking onto her terrified gaze. What matters is that you understand this. Power isn't a dress you can steal from a closet, Harper. It's a weight you have to be strong enough to carry. You wanted my life. I gave it to you. Every single heavy, crumbling piece of it. You choked on it because you are exactly what you always feared you were, an imposter. Genevieve, please! She sobbed, panic rising in her throat. Enjoy your cage, Harper, I interrupted, my voice turning to ice. I made sure they painted the bars just for you. I hung up the receiver. I didn't look back as she began to pound her fists against the plexiglass, screaming my name soundlessly through the soundproof barrier. As I walked out of the prison and into the crisp, clean afternoon air, I took a deep breath. The sky was a brilliant, unclouded blue. The game was over. The board was cleared. I had let her steal my life. I had watched it burn, and from the ashes, I had forged an empire that no one could ever touch again. And that is exactly how you execute a flawless, scorched earth revenge. Genevieve didn't just beat Harper. She handed her the shovel and watched her dig her own grave. From the ashes of a stolen life and a burning psychiatric ward, she built an untouchable empire, leaving everyone who betrayed her choking on the dust of their own greed. What would you have done if you woke up 5 years in the past? Would you have fought for your old life, or would you have built a trap this devious? Let me know your master plan in the comments below. If this story of calculated, ice-cold vengeance kept you on the edge of your seat, smash that like button, share the video with your true crime and drama-obsessed friends, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss another jaw-dropping story. See you next time.